Welcome everybody to the nursing home webinar. This is our September webinar where we're going to go over some nursing home do's and don'ts, ins and outs, and hopefully help you identify how to pick a good nursing home case, how to make sure that you don't start working on a difficult, not necessarily difficult, but too difficult, bad, for lack of a better word, nursing home case, and then some strategies and tips for how to work those cases both before you file the lawsuit and then afterwards. Admittedly, this is not my area of expertise, which is kind of awesome because it means I get to relax to some degree today, and I get to have two of my good friends. That's not nonsense. These are actually two of my good friends. Have them join us and tell us all the answers. So pressure's not on me this month. The pressure is squarely on them. And I hope that's making them extremely nervous, although I bet it's not. So without further ado, I'm going to have Andrew King and Xavier Carter join us. While they come in, I'll give them a quick little background. Andrew and I went to law school together and we graduated together. I will take full credit in saying that I introduced Andrew and his wife, Michelle, who's also in this webinar. If I have a claim to fame, that is literally it in my life. I introduced Andrew and his wife. So I've known Xavier for a good while too. He is the best looking bald guy that I've ever seen who's not on TV. And it's fun to say things like that and see that laugh from him. Xavier, I'm told, has a decent computer. Andrew's still working on Windows, 4. So we're waiting for him to log in. And there he is. So if you go in order of looks, the best looking person's in a white shirt. The second best looking person is in a dark jacket. And then the guy who's trying to look like, some sort of Latin American mob boss with the pocket square, that's Andrew, if you all don't know him. So why don't I do this? I've given you guys sort of introductions. You've heard half of them. The other half was just like you would imagine. But why don't you all start and just tell everybody who you are and actually introduce yourself.
I'll let Andrew go first as I try to regain my composure from those introductions.
Doesn't he look like he's, like running drugs in a sports boat at the end of a dock, like a speedboat from one island to the other, like a little bit, right?
Lothario is the word that comes to mind.
Rafi, nobody wants to hear about your fantasies, all right? Good
Dude,
morning, everybody.
This is the start to a good Netflix series, let me tell you.
Oh, I'm sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew King. I am an attorney at Watkins, Lurie, Roll, and Chance, along here with Xavier Carter. I'll let Xavier introduce himself.
Yep, I'm Xavier Carter. I'm here at Watkins, Lurie, Roll, and Chance as well, and excited to join again, like Mike said, two of my good friends to talk about nursing home cases, how to pick them, what kind of roadblocks we typically run into, and just kind of kick around some ideas with two really, really smart guys.
Well, the roadblocks that you used to run into were people like Andrew, because until pretty recently, Andrew was on the defense side and did a whole lot of these cases. So I think we're going to have, and he's probably still thinking like a defense lawyer, which maybe is not such a bad thing, but I think we're going to have some good back and forth. So, the first question that came to my mind is, I get a phone call. Somebody says, "Hi, my name's Sam. My sister, my mother, my brother, whoever is in a nursing home, and I think they may need a lawyer." What does the initial intake look like from your point of view when you get that first call?
Yeah, I'll start with this one, and Andrew, you jump in where you see fit. In many ways, it's like any other intake, but with an emphasis on a couple of things for us. What is the situation for the potential client? So usually when we get nursing home calls, it's a family member who was calling about a loved one that they have that was in a nursing home and has in many cases met their demise. In other cases, they're moving close to transitioning. In some cases, they're still with us. And maybe doing okay, but what we're trying to start finding out is, okay, what was this person's health condition? Why were they there? And what type of case type of potential nursing home case is this? What led to the call? So a lot of our calls, I'd say the majority of our calls deal with pressure wounds. Okay. Another large component of the cases that we deal with are fall cases. Sometimes we have malnutrition and dehydration. And so there are different health issues that are involved with each of those. And so we're trying to figure out what is the background health issue that led this person to be in a nursing home or an assisted living facility or other long-term care facility. And what is the complaint? What is the complaint? What are we complaining of? And what is this issue? And was it avoidable? Could this injury have been avoided, and how?
I've never heard it explained like that, but that makes a whole lot of sense to me, because basically everybody has some sort of pre-existing injury. It could just be age. I don't mean to say age is an injury, but there's a reason that person's in a nursing home.
Yeah, and I'll let Andrew weigh on this. Everyone that's in the long-term care facility is there for a reason. And so they're going to have some pre-existing conditions. So we need to understand what those pre-existing conditions are. At the same time, we can't lose focus on can't lose sight on the fact that they are there and the facility is being paid for a service, is taking care of these people. And what we want to find out is, have they done their job, or have they been significantly negligent in the way they've gone about the care that they've been providing?
And also, well, it also makes most of your clients older, right? I mean, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, the biggest thing that we look for in a case is the ability to help the family. If the resident is still alive, try and figure out a way to help the resident. Your question actually raised kind of an important issue that sort of highlights some significant facts. Sometimes the residents are still alive, and sometimes they are still in that facility that we believe is the target defendant. And honestly, that's a big problem for optics. There are very few cases that we like where a living resident still remains at the facility, and that's something to screen for when you're initially looking at a case.
What are the options somebody has? I mean, if I don't know how, I honestly don't know how people, especially low income folks or people that are on Medicare, Medicaid, something like that, how do they get moved to a different facility after something like this happens? Is it easy? Assuming you can't just say, well, move me, I've got enough money to pay the next place. Is it like a placement system, or how does it work?
Honestly, right now, the answer is that it's tough. Nursing homes are full, long-term care facilities are full, and it's really hard to get placement. And so the answer is that it's not easy. What we always tell the people that are coming in those situations is, look, it's nice that you're thinking ahead for litigation, and it's good that you're getting to us early. But the thing that you need to focus on is making sure that your loved one is getting appropriate care. And that's what we want them to focus on if their loved one is alive, is getting that appropriate care. So whether it's getting them to a better facility or even sending a letter in. We've had this experience recently where somebody was actually at a good facility, they just got poor care, and we sent a letter in, and the next thing they know, 7 of the executives from the nursing home are surrounding her. She got a private room. And so she was able to get some benefits from even just talking to us. And I'm not going to say that happens in every case, but it's one of those things that occurs given our current climate. The other thing that—
Wait, does the opposite ever happen? Do you ever send a letter? Because this happens with our apartment complex shooting cases a lot. We send a letter. This happened, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. We send a letter to the apartment complex. Hey, please give us your insurance information. And next thing you know, our tenant is being evicted. Is there ever repercussions on the other side?
We have not that I know of, but we do worry about that all the time. So we are very careful about it. Usually we try not to send out the letters, but sometimes it's unavoidable given the circumstances. And what we do is we tell the potential clients, we make them aware of that this is a potential issuance to start looking. And again, COVID has changed a lot of things in terms of nursing home cases. And it actually links into another thing that we really want to talk about is the impact that COVID has on some of the cases. One, COVID has a medical impact on people that have pressure injuries. And what the medicine is coming to find out is that sometimes COVID makes pressure injuries unavoidable. And I don't really like using that word in this sense because I like to think that most of the stuff is avoidable with better care, but that's what the medicine is showing. And secondly, what COVID did is it actually strained nursing homes. There's a real impact on the employment that these nursing homes have had. And so that necessarily led to less attention to the residents. And it's a sad situation. And I'm not saying they met the standard of care, but it's a very real thing that we're dealing with in analyzing these cases and what the optics will look like once we get in front of a jury.
So is that something to ask on the front end? Hey, whoever's calling, the person who's injured, Did they have COVID? Is that
Yeah.
something now that's new on the checklist?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very high on the checklist. I mean, we want to know, is COVID impacting the health condition that this person had? Now, if let's take a pressure wound. If the person was in a long-term care facility and had a pressure wound, and that pressure wound injury is unrelated to that person having had COVID themselves, then we're much more inclined to look a little bit more deeply. Ultimately, we suspect we're going to hear, hey, COVID impacted our ability to staff, and that's a fight we're prepared to have, and we have thought about strategies for dealing with how we will attack that issue. But if COVID impacted the fact that this person potentially impacted the fact that this person developed the pressure injury to begin with, that's a case problem. That's a big problem for a case.
Have you heard, as the some defense articulated yet, said to you, hey, we're going to say we were understaffed because of COVID? Or is this something that is on your mind and you're just waiting for?
We've heard a little bit there, in some cases, that they're not going to make that argument, because what that's going to lead to is a lot of discovery as to, okay, well, let's talk about what your staffing levels were like before COVID.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Right? And so they're going to have to make a demonstration that it really did impact their staffing.
I see that with apartment complexes. We typically say, hey, are you guys going to argue you didn't have enough money to make this place safer, to put up, to fix the gate, to do these kind of stuff? And if they say, yeah, we are, then it's okay. Let's talk about how much money this apartment complex made or didn't make, and how much money you had and didn't have.
Right.
All right. So you go through, you're asking, from what I gathered, you're asking what led to this person going in the nursing home, and what are their conditions while they're in there? What the heck happened? What's the injury? Are the two related? Is there any way that if it's COVID and pressure wounds is what I'm hearing, pressure sores, there could be some, cause and effect problem here. And then it's, what could the nursing home have done? Are most of that last question, what could the nursing home done? Is most of that stem from inattention, understaffing, more of just nobody doing anything as opposed to people doing bad things? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of the cases is from, and I don't like to use inattention, because what we found is in a lot of situations, the CNAs, the certified nursing assistants, are the ones that provide the majority of the care in these facilities. And it's not that they are inattentive most times. It's that they are so strained with regard to the resources that they have, be it from the number of people who are working, the number of other CNAs, and how many residents that each CNA has to deal with, the acuity level of the patients. And so they're not usually not so much inattentive as they're resource strained, and they're just not enough. There's just not enough staffing. And in these cases, 9 times out of 10, it all comes back to staffing. And ultimately, we're going to be having a fight about staffing. And every time we go out and start finding former employees, who they will tell us, yeah, we were understaffed. Yeah, we weren't able to do this. Yeah, we didn't have diapers and towels and other things that we need to care for the residents. So it's inattention in the sense that staffing levels are not where they need to be.
I try to always make sure people have practical advice leaving these webinars, even if it's just one thing that they've learned. And I've heard a few times that, and this was the best advice I got about the negligent security cases that I handle a lot of, is that unless the advice was on an intake, unless someone has a permanent injury or had 6 figures in medical bills, start with damages and say it's not a case. You can't handle that case because the cost, the time, the risk, the effort, the energy, that whole list of, that stuff that we do, it's not great enough, unfortunately, for that person, because the costs are so high. And even if you win, that injured person is not going to really recover anything that makes this worthwhile. What is the floor on these kind of cases? Because I can imagine they can get very, very time intensive and very expensive. So what's the floor on an injury? If somebody calls and says, this is my injury, what are those automatic no's that people shouldn't be considering taking as a case, meaning?
So honestly, it's a sliding scale. In nursing home cases, there can be cases where there are no injuries that are still worth taking. In fact, I was talking with another attorney that does a lot of nursing home cases yesterday, where he's got a case and he showed me a video where a woman was attacked by one of the CNAs. It was an awful attack and it's on video, but she wasn't injured. But it's still a case. And so in those cases, when you have clear liability, when you have explosive facts in a case, you can let slide on some of the damages. I will tell you that this also brings up a very interesting point in terms of the wrongful death claim versus the estate claims. A lot of times, we don't have a living residence. A lot of times this person will have died because they are, what people call in a downward spiral, failure to thrive, whatever you want to call it, and they end up dying after the nursing home. And what a lot of people mistake is kind of focusing on the wrongful death part. They'll spend a lot of time focusing on whether they can pin that fall or that pressure sore on the death. But really, a lot of the meat in these cases come from the pain and suffering that these people have. Like what you isolated is that these are older people, these are vulnerable people with medical conditions. But just because they need to go to a nursing home does not mean they should live the last few years of their life without dignity. And that's a huge damage in these cases when you can show that these people were not respecting dignity. And that's what we look for in these cases. And, we don't look for, amputations in every case, but we look for a cognizable damage that people are going to understand that they don't want their own loved ones going through.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, let me jump on that point.
Yeah.
And emphasize what Andrew just said. Most times when we bring a case, we're bringing wrongful death claims, and we're bringing claims related to pain and suffering. And it has been our experience that what juries get most riled up about is it's not the wrongful death case when someone is 90, 91, 87 years old, right? They were towards the end of their life anyway. What they get riled up about is the way that this person went out without the word Andrew used is dignity, right? What they get riled up about is that this person who was a vulnerable person, it's not that they went out, it's that they went out like this, right? And that is a nightmare for that person, and is a nightmare for their family. I mean, what we often deal with is families who come in and they are torn up and racked with guilt, and feel bad for even placing their loved one in the nursing home. The second point I wanted to double back on was with respect to the injuries and what the sliding scale that Andrew talked about, because it depends, right? Sometimes, and it depends on the type of case, right? If it's a stage 2 pressure wound, yeah, we're probably not going to look at very.
Well, tell me what the stages are. What's good and none of them are good. What's not as bad? What's bad?
Usually, just roughly speaking here, there's 4 stages to a pressure sore. Stage 1 is kind of not, kind of skin level, but not that bad. 2, 3, when you start getting up into the 3s and 4s, these pressure wounds get really bad and they look really gnarly. And then unstageable is when they get to the point where they're covered over and you can't measure the depth of the wound themselves, right? And so stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then unstageable. We're from a pressure wound case, we're looking at usually a 3 at a minimum. 4 is when it's open and looks pretty bad, and unstageable pressure wounds. We're talking about fall cases where usually we want someone to have fallen multiple times before we'll usually look at them.
Is that, I'm guessing that's for notice, because you want the facility to know that this person was likely to fall.
You got it. You're roughly, you're on it. Yeah.
On the pressure wounds, are you on an intake, are you looking for photos or are you looking for records? I mean, I know records you can get, and I wanted to ask you all about getting records, and just in terms of photos, I mean, will you even sign up a case without photos of the wounds?
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
But the photos are helpful, right? Because when you talk about pressure wounds, I don't think most people understand how bad these things can get and how bad they really
We
look.
should call them something else. It should,
yeah,
these should be rebranded to like black holes on your body, because I mean that's ultimately what they become, right? I mean, it's like but pressure wounds, I'm with you, doesn't sound terrible. Like it just, you have a pressure wound. It sounds like a flesh wound, which I don't want to get shot, but like, oh, it's just a flesh wound. You're fine. It's okay. But so you'll sign them up without photos. I wanted to ask you about records. In normal cases, getting records is a pain in the ass. How tough is it for you guys to get records where the person is in the facility and you don't want to send, maybe you don't want to send that letter saying we're the law firm. Maybe you don't want, the sister going down to the facility and saying, here's my release, give me the records. How do you all go about getting them?
So I'll take this one. Much the same. It's a huge pain in the ass. And the way we go about it sort of depends on the exigencies in the cases. Where there's a decedent, then it has its own problems. When there's no estate, when nobody has power of attorney, when they're alive, it all comes into play in terms of what's going on in the case. When we have, probably the most complicated is there's two really complicated situations that actually I'm dealing with right now. Is one, when there's a resident in the facility, do you want to alert them to what's going on? And the answer is probably no, usually. And so what we usually do is we try and empower the client to go in there with a high tech and get the information to say, hey, I'm interested to see what happened. I just wanted to look at the records as to what's going on. The real, the other problem when you have a wrongful death, when you have a death claim there, you also have an issue of when there's no estate. We've got a case now where a brother is trying to get some records for his sister, and because he's not a surviving spouse and there's no will, we're having a tough time getting it without the estate. And so we've got to worry about those situations. The biggest issue that we're also finding is that because nursing homes are regulated by both the state and the federal government, they are required to keep a lot of documentation on each one of their residents. And no matter how many times you ask for things, most of the time you're not going to get everything in the record. You have to keep going back, you have to keep asking. And that's where, having knowledge about nursing home cases comes into play, because you can look at a record and say, well, I know I'm missing these 3 or 4 things, and then you can go back to them and ask for it. Now, in the world of EMRs, it's a little bit easier for them to start doing things, but especially when I was doing defense work.
You're muted, Mike.
Mike, you're muted.
My dog was barking. EMRs, electronic medical records, right?
Yep.
All right, just making sure so you're talking in terms of this new world where records aren't necessarily printed and kept in a hard copy file.
Yeah, exactly. And the hard copy world presents its own issues, because a lot of times, and having defended a lot of these nursing homes and a lot of other medical providers, you just don't know where they're putting things. I remember on the defense side, we had a case where our client was keeping records in the shed in his personal backyard. And
Nice.
That was a big problem. I've had other instances where nurses were talking where they were taking notes, and what they would do is they would take notes in a personal journal. They would then transfer them to the official chart. And then very often they would do a burn of those records. Honestly, that happened a lot back in the days before EMR systems, but that's the stuff that you have to worry about in these cases, especially when you're looking at an EMR versus handwritten thing. And so really collecting records is a huge pain in the ass. And what you have to watch out for is making sure that they're providing you with a complete record, because I've seen it where they'll send you 3 different sets of certified records and they've got hundreds of pages of difference between them.
I got a brief tip for collecting medical records. Have really good, smart, hardworking paralegals.
Mhm.
Really helps.
Yeah.
Shout out to, I think Linda Jordan, one of our paralegals, is on, and they do a fantastic job of Andrew talked about big headaches, and they withstand the burden of most of that. So have a good paralegal.
I know, but it's so important. Our rule in the office is if it's a headache, ask yourself, should we be doing this? If it's that bad, should we even do it? But here you have to, and that's why you need folks like Linda. Let me ask you this. In med mal cases, in some of these negligent security shootings and products liability cases, most folks are not going to take them on your traditional 1/3 pre-suit fee, 40% once you file the lawsuit. I get referred cases and I see people signing up, cases like that, those expensive, challenging cases on those fees. And it does 2 things. One, I don't think it fairly compensates you for the work that you're going to put in, the risk that you're going to take, and also makes it really tough to, if you sign up the case, to have somebody like you guys join, because there's not enough money to go around sometimes. What's a standard nursing home? And I know this is a tough question and somewhat unfair, but what's a standard fee that people should be signing cases up to?
Yeah, I think it honestly, again, it depends on sort of the complexity of the case and what we're looking at. If a person comes to us and it's a slam dunk case that we know we're going to get settled before a lawsuit, then the fee is going to be less. But typically we're looking at in the 45% range for these cases, because they are complex, they are time intensive. And one of the biggest things that we have to explain to the clients, and we like to explain to people that don't do nursing home cases or don't do med mal cases every day, is don't dabble in these things, because they are expensive. And when you're looking at, the expert statute when it relates to med mal cases versus any other case where an expert's involved, it's difficult. It's tough. There are special rules. And so when it comes to that, that's why we pin our fee to that. Experts aren't cheap. I remember when I was young in my career, I was at a different firm. I went up to Chicago and there was an orthopedic surgeon expert that we were employing. My boss at the time handed me an envelope and said, give it to him. And so I handed it to him. I looked over his shoulders, a check for $50,000. I mean, these cases aren't cheap to deal with, and experts are very expensive in these cases. And making sure you get the right expert to start is very important in these cases, because you get all the time. You can look on the expert databases. I mean, heck, if you're on LinkedIn and your name says attorney, you're probably getting messages from legal nursing services all the time, and you just don't know who these people are right to use. And so getting the expertise, getting the right people in there is important. And, again, don't dabble in cases that you don't have expertise on. That's why we're here. We're happy to help. We're happy to talk to you about any of these cases. We're happy to get involved if you want us involved. But, a lot of that sort of the fee agreement sort of depends on the complexity of the case and what we're looking at.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the flip side of this. You said that we've talked at least a good bit about the intake on the personal injury side. So what I hear us doing is we're trying to figure out, the comorbidities, what the conditions were, what happened, whether those two things are linked or not linked. You don't want them linked in this case, which is funny. You're almost disproving causation, which is typically something lawyers are not doing. I thought it was interesting what you guys said about the wrongful death component of this, because I remember the first time I got a wrongful death call 6-7 years ago. It was a workers' comp case. And I called up Ben Gerber and I was so excited. And I was like, hey man, I have a wrongful death case for workers' comp. He's like, yeah, those aren't great cases. And I was like, what? So that's interesting to hear from your side too. But Andrew, you specifically on the reverse side, what is the nursing home's response once they find out they may get sued? I mean, what do folks typically do on that side? Is it a scramble mode? Is it, shut down? Like, what did you see the most of generally?
So honestly, it's varied. It depends on the nursing home that you deal with, the level of sophistication, how big are they? I dealt with some big, very regional nursing homes towards the end of my defense career. And, it was cost of doing business and they were fine with it. They understood it. But I've also dealt with the small facilities, the one-off facilities that don't get sued. They're scrambling. They're wondering if they need to transfer their assets. I've had nurses before asking if the plaintiff's attorney was going to come take their truck. And so they were, frankly, freaking out about cases. And so it's a varied response. The thing is that on that side, it's all reactionary, and you can't change the facts on any of it. And you just have to remind your clients on both sides that you're not there to change the facts. You're just there to deal with it. And when I was on the defense side, if they were freaking out about it, tell them to take a breath. We've got you. It's handled. It's going to be okay. And then figuring out a good defense. Whereas the more sophisticated clients actually might be a bit tougher because they're like, why hasn't this case gone away yet? Haven't you settled this yet? This is a frivolous claim. Please stop it. And sometimes they weren't.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at Georgia, when I worked on the defense side, my main client was Georgia Power. And we'd resolve a case and they'd say, I'd be like, case over. You're going to give me some sort of feedback here? And the feedback was always, this cost too much. You took too long and we shouldn't have been sued in the first place. Let me tell you, that was the most rewarding job I ever had, for sure. Definitely. When that was the feedback. Xavier, before we got started here, we were shooting the shit and I heard about your aunt case. Now, if you're listening, you might be saying, oh my God, is Xavier's aunt injured? No, I don't think so. I hope not. You might be thinking, wow, did someone's aunt do something? No. Tell us what your aunt case is.
Yeah, well, actually, Mike, to be frank with you, we've got two cases in the office right now where our clients, who both of whom succumbed, were attacked by ants in the long-term care facilities they were living in. One of them was in a nursing home facility, was attacked by ants and subsequently met his demise. And the one that I've had for a couple of years now and is moving its way towards trial was in an assisted living facility where a lady was attacked by fire ants on multiple occasions. And it really was a high-end assisted living facility, a new assisted living facility. And
these are ants, the insects.
Ants, the insects, fire ants.
How does this happen?
Yeah, well, in the case of the assisted living facility, it was a new building. It was near 400. There was ongoing construction, and construction tends to displace ants. And so these fire ants move steadily into the building. They've been having a fire ant problem, an ant problem for several months. They, according to the testimony we've had this far, didn't really treat it very seriously.
They're ants. And yeah,
they're ants. And
yeah.
but what we know is that they had multiple reports of ants being in people's room. Our client had reported ants in her room about a week before she first got attacked by the ants, and they didn't do anything about it. She was attacked on, we'll call it day one, and then they cleaned her up, wiped the ants off of her, put her back in her bed, and claimed, oh, this must be shingles. This is shingles that's all over this poor lady's body. She was attacked the second day. They maintained their fiction that it was shingles, and so we'll be going to trial on that in the next few months. But it's an example of someone, or what we see very often in these cases is just a very vulnerable person, someone who can't fend for themselves. If an ants attack you or me, we would just kind of brush it off. But this, they often have some dementia setting in, and they can't protect themselves. And that's the heart of these cases, that these people are in there, they need help and they need protection. And it is these nursing home facilities, assisted living facilities, and other long-term care facilities are being paid to provide the service of helping these people and helping protect them. And they are often falling very short of that.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's something that never would have crossed my mind. And if somebody called me and said that they had ants, to me, at least on the first blush, that's kind of like somebody who calls and says, hey, I went to McDonald's and I had something in my meat, but I spit it out and I was just mad. I get that call once a year, maybe. Yeah. I give you guys a lot of credit for really thinking about that and how it affected these people and going forward with the case.
Yeah, Mike, we've had ant cases, we've had scabies cases. It can get, it's pretty bad. It can get pretty bad. Yeah.
Do most of the cases arise from people who at assisted living facility or nursing homes? Because the one thing that we haven't mentioned, which I think I know what your answer will be, but I'll ask the question. We haven't mentioned hospice. I know the standard, at least I think the standard at a hospice facility is probably less than an assisted nursing home facility. Is that true? I've at least heard that before. And I don't know if maybe it's not the official standard, but hospice seems like there'd be less requirements, less duty upon the hospice.
So a lot of the residents are actually getting hospice care when they're at nursing homes or ALFs. Okay. And the real thing is that a lot of people don't understand hospice, palliative care, those sorts of things. And so just because somebody is getting some of those services doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to die within 6 months, because you will see those all over the records, because that's a Medicare requirement to receive that care. On the defense side, I remember I had a case where a woman was living at home with her family for a long time, 93-year-old woman. And then she went into my client at the time's facility for hospice respite care. And she was not on hospice care at home, but she was a demented patient that needed a lot of help, and her family was giving it to her. And so when the family needed a break, they sent her in for respite hospice care. And, the case arose from the 5 days that she was in respite care plus 2 weeks that she received hospice care from another place. And so just because you see the word palliative care or hospice care, it's a bit of a misnomer. You really need to look at what that patient looks like beforehand. It probably plays into what the wrongful death claim would look like, or what the pain and suffering might look like. Because usually when they're getting hospice or palliative care, they're usually getting probably more opiates and painkillers than they typically would be getting if they were going to be treated. But, just watch out for those things. You got to look at the records, you got to look at how they were doing, more than just looking at the label of hospice or palliative care.
After you get one of these cases in, you say, we want to take this case, we want to work on it. Let's say you've gotten whatever information you think you need. What is the next step? Do you come to that fork in the road where you have to decide, do I send a demand or do I file suit? Like most cases, is that a similar fork that you guys run into?
It is. And I think Xavier can probably chime in on this a little bit more, but again, it plays into a lot with what facility you're talking about and your relationship. I'd like to give shout outs when shout outs are due. I will tell you that the Pruitt, the people that are representing Pruitt right now, Oak Bridge, they are trying to do a lot more pre-litigation negotiations. And I'll give them a shout out for trying to change that example without making us go to town, depose every nurse. And so I'll give that to them. So it depends. It depends on the facilities. Most of the time we just file suit, to be honest with you, because I don't think a lot of it comes to, comes to a result pre-suit a lot of the times. But again, it's one of those questions of, you got to look at the facts in the case and who you're dealing with and your relationships with them. Fortunately, the guys that we work with have been doing this for a long time, and they've got great relationships with everybody in the community.
Before you file a lawsuit, most likely I would imagine that there's some sort of, I know that there are expert requirements, at least for certain of the claims. I'm not going to ask you all, I'll give the brief overview, which is medical negligence claims, medical being very broad, require an affidavit from an expert. Simple negligence claims don't. We don't have enough time, not just in this webinar, but like today or this week or maybe this month, to go through where that line is drawn. I know, I see you guys nodding. That's a really tough line. What's medical negligence versus what's simple negligence? But putting that issue aside, we can do that for another day. Talk generally about the requirements and how long it takes to get an expert on board, the process for finding somebody. Because in my office, if I get a car case, I can file that probably, if I have a police report, I can at least file that today. Like literally, we could file it today and I could hopefully serve it tomorrow. I know you can't do that with your kind of cases. So what's the timeline and the ramp up to get a case filed?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, and this goes back to collecting medical records, right? The discussion we talked about before with regard to collecting medical records and getting them all in, getting a complete set of them. That takes time. That takes the bulk of the time. And then I've heard Lance Lurie, whom we work with and who's been doing this for God knows how many years, talk about this in terms of talking about these kinds of cases and medical malpractice cases. Like, you're trying to figure out how deep you're going to get into the water, right? You might dip a toe in, and then now you're sticking a foot or an ankle in. And that is, we get the records, we review them ourselves to see whether we think there's the potential of a case here. Then we send it out to an expert, because to your point, Mike, when we file these cases, we almost always get an expert affidavit to go along with it. So we were almost always including an expert affidavit. 9 times out of 10, that is a nurse expert. Sometimes we get a doctor involved as well early and on the front end, but we're always attaching an affidavit. And so you got to give your expert 30 days or whatever time they need or require based on how busy they are to look at 1,000 or 2,000 page record, form their conclusions, get an affidavit drafted. And so, it can take a good 6 months to get a case from intake up to collecting the records, reviewing them yourselves, having an expert review them, getting an affidavit. It could take that kind of time frame.
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody's listening to this and is sitting on a nursing home case and saying, I've got 9 months, 8 months, 7 months, 6 months to the statute, that's when the warning signs are going off. It's not 2 months. It's not 1 month. You got to be on this pretty early and doing things very early on, because a lot of this takes time, not only the records, but Andrew mentioned earlier, I think getting an administrator on an estate. I mean, that depending on the county, that can take a ton of time. Getting the records alone, finding the right experts. Do you all find yourself using the same experts for the affidavit? And if so, do you typically change experts once you're in the case?
No, we usually kind of stick with, because that's a big cost outlay, right? To
start over.
Come in, spend a lot of time reviewing records, getting up to speed on the case, and then doing the same thing for another expert. So we may bring in additional experts, but you 9 times out of 10, our expert that we have signed an affidavit, we're going to use throughout the case.
How do you staff these cases internally? Is this something that we do a lawyer paralegal team? Is it 2 lawyers? I mean, I know it depends on the case, but what do you think about when it first comes in? Who's going to handle it, and what kind of staffing you need?
Usually what we have is a 2-lawyer team, if not more, plus a paralegal, plus a secretary on a case. These things are document intensive. Even small cases that people were only at the facility for a few weeks can be thousands of pages worth of records just from the facility. And so really, you need the manpower to get in there. You need the manpower to make sure you understand what's going on. And again, I see Linda's here. Like Xavier said, we're fortunate to have a lot of very good paralegals and a lot of people to help keep Xavier's and my heads on straight and trying to get these cases done. Because really what you got to keep track of is thousands of pages of medical records, plus, 15 to 20 employees that you may want to depose, plus a director of nursing, plus an administrator. And so these cases are complex, they're big, and you have to have multiple hands in there to make sure it all gets done timely and properly.
You mentioned talking to former employees, and you just mentioned all the depots that sometimes go on. This is the most selfish question I'll ask, because I ask everybody this who finds former employees of businesses. How do you find them? Because in my world, finding those people, those are the stories. That is that's the good shit. And that's where people get really mad, because typically if you don't work there anymore, you either got fired and you're angry, you left because it was a crappy place, whatever. And those are the people that are the meat of a lot of my cases. How do you guys find those people? Xavier's smiling. I want to hear his answer.
Without giving too much of the secret sauce, we hire people to do it, right?
Okay.
We get people. We'll get a list. First of all, we'll ask in discovery for give us a list of your former employee or people who were employed around that time, and then we hire people to go out and kind of make first contact with them, and try to find them and try to make first contact with them, and then we'll kind of follow up from there. Is how we usually do it.
I've got a case right now. We're in federal court. We went through 9 months of discovery, so the longer track. And on the we have a case in federal court, and then there's a similar case going on state court for unrelated crimes, shootings, but they were so close in time and same apartment complex and all that. One case has one defense firm. My case has a different defense firm. And we're having two very different experiences. The plaintiff's lawyer on that other case versus me. So we're having very different experiences based on defense counsel. I'll say
it's always fun, right? Yeah.
Oh my God, it's ridiculous. So in this other case, we found the plaintiff's lawyer calls us up in that case and goes, "Hey, did you hear about all these new employees?" And I'm like, "New? No, I don't know anything." 42 employees all during discovery. They're new to us, but they were former employees. 42 of them just never disclosed to us, but given in documents to the other case by the other defense firm who actually handed the documents over and said, "Here you go." So that's on my mind right now. How are we finding people? Alex Brown in my office, with an assist to his wife, who's a recruiter. If you ever need to find anyone on LinkedIn, it is scary. It is scary. They will find everybody.
I may very well take you up on that like this afternoon.
Give him, I don't know if he's on this list. I haven't checked. Give him a beer and tell him to find someone on LinkedIn, and you've just made his afternoon. All right. In the few minutes that we got left, and this is the question I didn't prepare you guys for. What's something that somebody who doesn't handle these cases, what's the one or two things they should know other than these cases are really tough, and other than call someone who's an expert? I mean, whether it's on the intake process or if somebody's knee deep in the case, what is one or two things that, the wisdom that you can impart on somebody to make sure they pick a right case or don't get in trouble after they've picked the case?
Truthfully, one of the biggest reasons that I came back to the plaintiff side after my sojourn at a defense firm for a long time is they're rewarding. I love helping people, and especially this vulnerable population of people that need help and go to other people for medical help. It's just rewarding, especially with the ones that you can actually meet. You get to hold their hand. You get to tell them, I helped get you out of there. I helped get you set up to get better care in the future. That's the one thing that I take from it. And that's the one thing I take into every day when I look at these cases.
I think that's a really good point. We shouldn't overlook that. We're nothing wrong with people who do most car accidents, and we do a ton of car accidents. There's always going to be car accidents. In terms of this, though, you might be able to actually get X nursing home, Y nursing home to stop doing the crap that they're doing, and hopefully treat people better. That's a really good point. Xavier, you got anything?
Yeah, I'd echo that and add to it that working with the families, right? As I mentioned earlier, when something bad happens in a nursing home and you've got people who feel guilty about putting mom or dad in there in the first place, there's a lot of guilt. And so we spend a lot of time assuaging guilt and saying, hey, you didn't do anything wrong, right? This person was at a point where they needed help that you couldn't provide, and you didn't do anything wrong, they did, right? And giving those people voice, giving those family members voice, and have them felt like they've been listened to, and that someone is doing something about what happened to their loved one is, as Andrew said, really rewarding.
I would imagine though that you guys get a lot of questions from these families that are not necessarily legal questions, that are questions that surround the case, surround the injury, but really there's not a legal option. Do y'all spend a lot of time giving advice, practical advice? Should you move nursing homes? Should you do this? Should you not do that? Is that how y'all spend a good bit of time, at least on the outset of the case?
Yes and no. You know, some of that we advise on where we can, but what we try to remind people is, hey, we are nursing home litigators, and we address issues when things happen to people. But some of these issues we kind of stay out of a little bit, right, with regard to whether to move mom or not. That's a personal, individual decision that is outside kind of a legal context. And if you think it's best to move mom, then we support you in that. If you think mom would be better served just kind of staying where she is, then we support you in that too. And what's most important is getting the best care for mom, right?
All right. Is there anything I missed that you guys wanted to share?
I think
All right, cool. I did an amazing job then. This is clear. I accept your praise and rewarding me with that feedback. I really appreciate it.
Let me one thing that we didn't talk about that I always
Okay.
that I love to talk about is arbitration agreements, right? And so
Ooh, that crossed my mind like 20 minutes ago and it skipped. Yeah, because on the initial intake records, that's one of the things I imagine you're looking for. Did someone sign?
It is one of the first things we're looking for. And
Okay.
so if you're doing one of these cases, that's one of the first things you need to be apprised of is, was there, oftentimes they don't know whether they've signed an arbitration agreement because they've stuck a packet of documents in front of them and no one knows what they signed at that time. So you want to find out, let's get the admission packet. Let's figure out whether there's an arbitration agreement in there and figure out if there is, whether there's ways around it. Be that.
But let me back you up for 1 second, Xavier, because I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Why is arbitration bad? Why is arbitration not preferred? Because it does have some benefits, which are a more efficient, possibly, solution to the problem, and you get a result quicker. So what is wrong with why are you looking for these arbitration agreements and trying to get out of them if they exist, or hoping they don't exist in the first place?
Andrew, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is just going back to the right to a trial by jury. That was set up for a reason, and there's a reason why we have our peers place judgment on defendants in these cases. There's a reason that we have multiple people in the room, 6 to 12, saying, yes, they were wrong to do that, or yes, they were right, and it's okay. And the arbitration agreement bypasses that entire process. As you said, it's more efficient, but honestly, it's more efficient because you don't get the information that you need a lot of the times. You don't get to talk to the people that you need to get the full story. These nursing homes, these ALFs, they are bound and responsible for care for these people around the clock. And if you can only take 2 depositions because of a particular arbitration rule, or if you can only get 2,000 pages of documents, or if you're limited, you're never going to get the full story, and you're never really going to fully understand what happened to those people. And so from a non-litigation standpoint, it's like reading half of the book, or probably even less. And so you don't want to do that unless the book's really boring. But if you want to actually find out what happened to the person, figure out, it fills the litigation process better, and then you get to a right to a trial by jury. That's why we want that. Secondarily, arbitrations, they're tough. You get one educated person in the corner, you get a panel of 1 to 3. You never know what they latch onto, much like you never know what a jury latches onto. But at least with a jury, you got more people coming in there. You got more people saying what the standard of care, what care these people should be providing in their community. And that's something that's a public service, where a jury comes in and says, that's not right, don't do that again.
That's one of the best explanations I've ever heard to that question, because I've asked people that over the years tons of times. But no joke, that's probably one of the best explanations I've ever heard. Xavier, so I apologize for cutting you off. So step 1 is there an arbitration agreement? Step 2 is if there's not, that's a good thing. And then how you're proceeding.
Yeah, and if there is, then let's see whether or not there are any ways around it, right? And so sometimes we've had cases where the case comes in, mom was put in to the nursing home 2 weeks ago, and it's already gone bad. we get the admissions packet, and we still have a couple weeks where we can get out of it. We can say, hey, we revoke this arbitration agreement. Sometimes it's a case where we put mom and we didn't have power of attorney. and so maybe,
I'll show you guys in a second what my dog is doing, but I did not mean to interrupt.
No,
your Ferragamos.
The point, Mike, is that there are sometimes ways around the arbitration agreement, and so we want to look into that and figure that out. So just the bottom line here is be apprised as to whether or not there's an arbitration agreement, because it can significantly lessen the value of your case for you and for the client. And so we want to be on top of that.
Now I've muted myself. This is like, this is the worst muting of my webinar. I have a shirt that says you're on mute. I literally should have worn that shirt to make fun of myself. For people who maybe have loved ones going into nursing homes or already are there, or whatever the circumstances are, do you have to sign an arbitration agreement to get into a nursing home?
No, they cannot withhold care because you've declined to sign an arbitration agreement.
Can a private facility that choose to, or is it right across the board?
You can't do that. There's a regulation on it.
Yeah. I can see your billboards one day, your TV ads. Don't sign arbitration agreements.
You're not lying. I've thought about this. I've thought about don't sign arbitration agreement right above whatever nursing home, on a billboard right above whatever nursing home.
If we may make a deal on this webinar. If you take half the billboard and say that, I'll take the other half that says, when you sue the person who hit you, I have to trim this down. When you sue the person that hit you in a car crash, you're suing their $1 billion insurance company, not to them. Don't worry about them. They have insurance. That's what I would want.
I definitely think you're going to have to make that short.
Yeah. Lawsuits are about insurance companies, not people. I mean, that's literally, at least not defendants. All right, guys, I appreciate you joining me. To recap here, we've got some good tips about how to do an intake. We have the things to look out for, like arbitration agreements, how we get those things like medical records and the information we need. We know at least what some of the good cases are, what some of the bad cases are, because we're looking especially at the causation element. Was the pre-existing injury the reason that they're in the facility? Was that really the reason for the injury, or was it something that the nursing home did? And then we've heard a few times, I think, about the common themes that you guys are using, which makes sense, which is understaffed, underfunded, not given the resources they need. I bet that's a pretty cool dynamic to have a nurse or somebody coming into court and saying, we wanted to do better, we just couldn't for Miss Smith. I bet that's a really good dynamic. Yep. Other than that, our next webinar is going to be a somewhat similar topic. I hope you guys will join. It's going to be deposing the defendant's expert, meaning their doctor, so like a causation expert. So we're going to have our resident doctor, Alan Stagmeyer, who's a lawyer in my office, but I kid you not, could have an MD, I think, right now. But he's going to do that with us. I appreciate you guys joining us, and I know everybody else will. There's a link to next week's webinar in the chat here. All right, well, this webinar is over. So on that note, thanks everybody, everybody that joined, and we'll see you next month. The webinar link is on there, and we'll send out an email soon about the date. I don't know off the top of my head, so forgive me. But thanks, guys, and I'll see y'all soon.
Take care.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.